This is quite possibly the single funkiest episode of the Lunduke Hour to date. We are going to be doing something that I do fairly often, once or twice a year or so. But up until now, I've always just simply written about it. I write a series of articles over on networkworld.com, and every now and then I'll do a challenge to myself. I will say, Brian, what would it be like to use nothing but a Linux terminal, no GUI, just a text terminal for however long, a couple of days, a few weeks, a month. How would it be to use nothing but DOS for a couple of weeks? How would it go? What applications would I use? What would the experience be like nowadays in the modern era to use this old hardware or to use something that's just a little bit outside of the mainstream? And I do this for a whole bunch of reasons. Part of it is just for the fun of it, and that probably is most of it. I like to see what it was like. I like to reminisce about the 1980s, the 1990s. I like to see what it's like to live computing wise in an environment that is totally different from what most of us use day in, day out. And maybe that will in some way help me get a better understanding of where we've been, where we've come from, our computing history, and maybe how not so far we've come. And maybe it'll give me some ideas about some cool features we've lost along the way. But more than anything, it's really just for fun. So recently, I've started toying around with old Apple IIgs stuff. And I know this is a little bit ridiculous, but I'm challenging myself to utilize the Apple IIgs operating system. Oh yeah, not full time because that's bonkers, but just for a couple of days in total over the next few weeks to use it for writing, to see how I can incorporate it into my daily workflow. And I think it's going to end up being kind of interesting. So that's what today is. I I don't know how many of you will actually want to watch something like this, and that's totally okay. This is a very bizarre thing. I absolutely get that. Maybe you want to see how much pain Brian Lunduke is willing to put himself through in order to, use 30-plus-year-old software and hardware technology. Maybe some of you are curious what using an Apple IIgs was like. Maybe you never got a chance to have one when you were younger, or maybe you're just weren't alive back then. So we're going to go through it. Most of this episode is going to be me exploring an Apple IIgs. This is my first day trying this out, and I've made some progress in it, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how I did it. Before we get started on that, we're going to go through a very brief, very quick history of the Apple IIgs. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Apple IIgs is from Apple Computer. Now, Apple Computer is not called Apple Computer anymore. It is simply called Apple because I guess they decide they don't make computers anymore, so they dropped the word computer from their name. This machine is a successor of sorts to the original Apple computer, the original Apple II, sorry. The Apple IIgs, the GS stands for graphics and sound, and it really was, for the time, an amazing piece of technology. Color graphics, sound, the works. It came out in September 15th of 1986, and they were in production all the way up until 1992, the end of 92. That's a six-year run, roughly? That is amazing for a single piece of hardware. I think it went through a few, iterations, but essentially it was an Apple IIgs for 6 some odd years. And that kind of makes you wonder, nowadays, when you go buy a machine, it is rare that same machine, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, is still in production the very next year. It's rare. In fact, many operating systems from some of the main corporations, like Apple, don't even support new versions of their operating system on machines older than 2 or 3 or 4 sometimes years. Installing, let's say, a brand new version of Mac OS X or Mac OS or whatever they want to call it nowadays, because they seem to change their name and the versioning with the wind, on a 5 or 6 year old Mac is well, a challenge for many models. So the Apple IIgs had an extraordinarily long run, and that is despite the fact that the company that made it kind of treated it like a redheaded stepchild. So let's do a quick run through here. This is what this little beauty looked like. That's an Apple IIgs. The one on the left here is actually the WAS edition. The first 1,000, I believe it was the first 1,000 of these that were produced had a little like ink drawn on version of Steve Wozniak's signature as a sort of homage to Woz, who developed the original Apple computer. And that is just amazing. I think that is very cool. I would love to have one of those. Very, very cool. I never had an Apple IIgs when I was younger. I got to use them a little bit in a computer lab at school. We had a whole host of Apple II clones that were called Franklins. That was from a company called Franklin. And they were basically Apple IIs, but they were cloned. And we had one Apple IIgs, and that was the teacher's machine. The teacher had that IIgs because that was a big, fancy, expensive machine for the time. And I got to play with it a little bit, and it was a really amazing machine. Back then, there wasn't a lot like it. The Commodore Amigas spring to mind as another amazing machine from the time, but realistically, this was in so many ways light years ahead of where the Macintoshes were at the same time and where the IBM PCs were at the time. So the hardware spec-wise, the hardware spec for an Apple IIgs was kind of interesting. It had a 2.8 megahertz processor in there, and that was kind of hobbled, and I'll talk to you more about the processor as we go. RAM-wise, it shipped with either 256K or 1 megabyte, but it was expandable all the way up to 8 megs. In 1986, could you imagine having 8 megs of RAM? This was unheard of. In 1986, I had 640K of RAM. The famous Bill Gates quote, 640K ought to be enough for anybody. Well, it was enough for me, or it had to be, because that's what I had on my old machine. But this was, you could go all the way up to 8 megs. That's amazing. Graphics-wise, it could display a ton of colors, and it go all the way up to 640 by 200 resolution. I mean, it's by nowadays standards, I mean, that's minuscule, right? But for back then, it was just phenomenal. Now, here's the really cool thing. The sound chip was an old Ensoniq sound chip, and it was so good. It was so impressive. It was capable of such amazing sounds. And remember, this was 1986, that Apple computer actually got sued by Apple the music label. And you might remember this. Apple the music label was the music label behind the Beatles. And they came to a deal. I may have some of the minor details wrong on this, but I think I've generally got it. They came to a deal with Apple Computer where Apple Computer would not get into the music business while they used the name. That way people wouldn't get confused with the two Apples, Apple, the music label, and Apple, the computer company. Well, the Apple IIgs was so good at sound and was capable of reproducing music so well that Apple, the music label, actually sued Apple Computer over it because they made a computer that was too good at sound. It's not like Apple, the music label, made a computer of any kind. This wasn't what they did, but still very, very interesting. Also, this machine had 7 expansion slots, so you could put on literally Ethernet coprocessor cards, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It's very interesting. A card that was a complete x86 PC on a card, so you could run DOS and DOS software right on this thing, SCSI interfaces, everything. And really fascinating, the Apple IIgs was the first computer from Apple to use the ADB, Apple Desktop Bus, the little serial connector that Apple used for well over a decade on their Macintosh line for connecting peripherals like mice and keyboard and whatnot. The old Macintoshes that were shipping back then, they used these really weird, like Ethernet-ish connector ports. It was very bizarre. And the ADB, the Apple Desktop Bus, was first on an Apple IIgs. So really, in a lot of ways, from a hardware perspective, the Apple IIgs was amazing. Color graphics, back when the Macintosh was strictly black and white, not even grayscale, didn't do shades of gray, black and white. That's what the Macintosh was back then. And this was doing colors, lots of colors. I'll show you that in a moment here. The software-wise, it was also really interesting. It originally shipped in 1986 with ProDOS 16, which was basically a souped-up, version of what was previously available, graphical and all that. But it was basically to tide people over. It was a placeholder until the GS operating system was released. So 2 years later, a little less than 2 years after the Apple IIgs first shipped, the GS operating system shipped. And it was a 16-bit operating system. This is 1988. Sorry. This is almost just shy of 30 years ago. Am I doing the math right? 88, 98, 2008. So yeah, 98, 30 years ago. It had a full graphical environment that looked amazingly similar to the Macintosh environment, except in full color. It had some seriously awesome features for the time. It had what was called file system translators. And get this, it was capable of, it used ProDOS as its main native file system. It was also capable of dealing with HFS, the hierarchical file system, from the Macintosh side of things, FAT, and CDs. So you could do stuff with multiple different media, floppy disks, CD-ROMs, etc. It had a graphical user environment. It had user loadable fonts. This was killer back then. So you could actually have multiple fonts and load them whenever you wanted. It had networking via AppleTalk. Device drivers had a very simple concept for device drivers and a simple way of handling them. And it was a monolithic closed source kernel. This was way back there, and it lasted all the way. The operating system was finally closed off and not released or updated again in 1996, a full decade after the Apple IIgs came out. All right. Now, before we dive into the glory that is the Apple IIgs, I want to show you guys something from System 76. They sent me this bad boy. Oh, it's upside down. Look at that. I should put it right side up. This is the System 76 Galago Pro laptop. It is their brand new one, and it is so epically choice. It is super thin. It has this cool little flop down Ethernet port here, so it's slim profile, but in order to fit a full Ethernet port, let's see if I can get the close up on that for you. Look at that. Yeah, sexy, right? Got a nice little SD card slot, HDMI out. It's got the little mini HDMI, DVI, whatever the heck display porty thing that is. I never use one of those, but for those of you who do, that's fantastic. I got USB 3 and fantastic. More USB 3 on this side. Really, really slick machine. Here, let me pop this open for you. It's just really cool. I haven't had much time to play around with this yet, but I'm really digging it. The keyboard is super nice. It's just really nice. This one comes with an Intel i7. The one they shipped to me to play around with for the next couple of days has 8 gigs of RAM in it. It's just a phenomenal machine. The lines on this are just so sleek. I really dig it. The screen is really high DPI. It's a big, giant retina type screen. That's what Apple would call it. Since this is an Apple show, we'll use some of their Apple lingo, but they don't call it. System 76 doesn't call it that. They call it high DPI because that's what it is. But it's just so slick. It's all this very, very sleek, sharp-edged aluminum. It's really, really good feeling. I'm really digging this laptop. I really am digging it. Even the power button is just really nice. It's got a slight it jets out of the side ever so slightly. For those who can't see it, it's barely perceptible, but it's just right. Like, it's not a big button, it's not a flat button, it's just slick and machined. Feels so nice. Anyway, System 76 just released these bad boys. If you're by any chance up at Linux Fest Northwest here this coming weekend, I'll have that on me if you want to play around with it. If you want to get your greasy fingers all over it, feel free to come on up to me and talk to me about it. Really, really slick laptop. Plus, ships with Linux by default, ships with a version of Ubuntu. Over the next couple of days, I'm going to be installing a bunch of different Linux distributions on that bad mamma jamma. Testing it out, testing out the battery life, testing out the gaming performance, which at first blush is pretty fantastic for the machine. And if you guys want me to try anything out with it, just feel free to let me know. You can pick that up over at system76.com. Okay. All right. We need to focus here, and we need to talk about what it's like to live in an Apple IIgs. Now, clearly, clearly what you see next to you, if you're listening to the podcast version of the show, you're totally missing out, because this is a very visual episode, and it just is, and there's just no other way around it. But I'll try and describe things as I go to keep you guys along for the ride. Okay. This is the last shipping version of the GS operating system, of GSOS. And you'll notice at first glance, it looks a lot like an old Mac. I mean, a ton. Same basic UI design, same basic, there's an Apple menu in the top right. If you go to the Apple menu on a Mac and say about this Mac, it'll show you how much RAM each individual thing that's currently running is using. This does the exact same thing. About this Apple II GS shows you how much RAM the Finder is using. It even uses the same terminology as the Mac side. It's very, very similar in that regard. And it's just very, very simple to use. It is very much a mouse-driven interface. Now, it's not a big multitasking operating system. You're not going to load up. It's like the old Macs, you're loading one thing at a time. Macs really didn't get multitasking until later on, and the Apple II GS is kind of the same way. You can kind of work around that. Much in the same way that Macs had it with things called desk accessories. And desk accessories were things like little notepads and whatnot, like this one here. This one's called Hermes. It's just a simple notepad desk accessory. But really, you can have stackable movable windows, text editors, and everything like that going on all the time. And it's an oddly modern interface and an oddly modern system to utilize. It's very, very intuitive, considering it's over 30 years old, or close to 30 years old from the latest software release. And that's fairly impressive. All right, so let's kind of take a look around here. Let's close some of these desk accessories out. So first of all, I don't have Apple II GS hardware. So I'm clearly running this via emulation. And for the emulator, there's a couple of options available to you. One of them is Keg's or Kent's. Kent's emulator for GS. Runs totally fine. I'm using a fork of that called GS Port, which works really well under Linux. I ended up having to build it myself. I compiled it myself because there weren't packages available for OpenSUSE when I did this. But it compiled so easily, and I'll put a link in the description for the video so you can check out the GitHub page for this. It's very, very easy to build. So what I did, since the Apple II GS, it can handle multiple hard drives, lots of multiple hard drives. So I decided to create a series of 4 hard drives, right? One for my system, it's called GS hard drive here. One for my applications that are, software I'm using, basically word processors and the like. They're called tools, a games hard drive, and a data hard drive to store all my data. Now, the reason I broke it out into multiple hard drives like this is that the ProDOS file system, let me pop this open, the system here, has a limit of about, I think it's 32 megs is the hard limit there for the size of the file system in ProDOS. And 32 megs back then, that was quite a lot. So I have 4 32 meg drives here. Now, this is the system drive. There's a couple of things on the system drive beyond just the system, but the system part is what we're going to be focusing on here. Let me go pop this open. All right, so this is what's in the system drive. You notice it's got the Finder, it's got, well, pretty much everything you'd expect. Now, across the top, you've got a couple of things. One is called Desk Accessories. A Desk Accessories folder literally is exactly what you think it is. And the drivers folder is what you think that is too. The drivers have .driver files in them. And .driver files, I believe this is how it works. Oh no, maybe it's not just .driver. I still have some stuff to learn, but some of them are .driver. Are drivers like SCSI drivers and whatnot. And so the drivers go in there. You add the drivers into this folder, and then when you reboot the system, these drivers are loaded when you start the system up. And to give you an idea of how the system starts up, we're going to go ahead and close the emulator here and relaunch it here. Here we go. Now watch it very carefully. Here we go. Boom. So it booted up fairly fast, but you could see it has kind of like the progress bar on boot, much like a Mac does from like the 90s or 80s, where you see the little progress bar and it loads individual extensions. Kind of the same thing over here for this. I'm going to close some of these out here. Which is very interesting. I'm really just fascinated by it overall. All right, so let's go back into the system folder here. All right, now fonts. Let's pop this open. You notice we've got lots and lots of fonts because, again, user definable fonts. Now, you'll notice each of the fonts has a dot with a number after it. Yeah, because each font has different size for each size that font that it supports, which is kind of an interesting way of doing it. So it doesn't necessarily scale all of the fonts, but it has predefined rendered versions of the different sizes, which is very fascinating. All right, and then file system translators. Here we go. We've got different file systems such as ProDOS and HFS+. And these file system translators literally are translators for file systems. So you can stick in an MS-DOS disk and rock and roll, and that's pretty cool. And I believe that's this one there. I'm not 100% on that. I could be totally wrong. All right, let's close this out. Now, let's move into what I can actually do with this. So if I'm going to live in an Apple IIgs, if I'm going to use an Apple IIgs for any length of time, I need a couple of things. And the first thing I need is a word processor. So I went looking around to see what an Apple IIgs had, and could I get a modern feeling word processor running on an Apple IIgs emulator or Apple IIgs hardware for that matter from 30 plus years ago? It turns out totally, with several options. So first thing I found was WordPerfect. Now I used WordPerfect for DOS back in the 80s, and that was kind of my word processor of choice. And if you pop this open, you double click on the WordPerfect icon here and double click, there we go. And you notice it popped right up, and bam, I've got a WordPerfect, basically graphical word processor, but it does look a little bit like WordPerfect for DOS. Blue background, white text, very simple in that regard. Definitely looks very old school, which not necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely looks dated. So I kept looking around, like, what else can I find? Turns out there's a version of AppleWorks, or better known as ClarisWorks, depending on who you are and when you got the software, for the Apple IIgs, called AppleWorks GS. So let's pop this open. Boom. Boom, we've got a full Office suite here. So let's start with the word processing side of things. Across the top, it lets you choose what kind of file you want to create. Very simple, not that unlike, say, LibreOffice or whatnot. And then you can click New, and then away you go. You've got a word processor that can handle, well, just about any font you want to throw at it. It's got a ton of fonts, so that one's a really ugly font. Let's go Chicago, right? And you can do all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's a full-featured word processor. Spell checking, grammar checking, sizes, styles, colors, tabs and margins. I mean, it's a full visual word processor. And this one came out in the end at, was it 1989? So this is from 89, nearly 30 years ago. Now, if I'm going to be using it for any length of time, I need to be able to know what I can save it as. So I go Save As. Because I have so many drives on the system, it takes a moment, because it's looking through all the drives available and loading up all of the translators to see which file systems it can write to. And I can write to any of the drives in the system, and I can write that file out in the AppleWorks format, the old version of the AppleWorks format with formatting, which I believe, after a little bit of tinkering, most of which I can eventually get up into LibreOffice, or I can just save it as plain ASCII text, which is fairly handy. A lot of my work I do is just in straight text anyway, because a lot of the times I write everything inside of Word Grinder or Nano or some sort of text editor inside of a Linux terminal. So this really is honestly a bit of a step up. And if you look around, I mean, it's got everything that you'd normally want, spacing and justification and everything. It is a full-featured, very powerful word processor. It is an impressive little beast. Now, inside AppleWorks, I can open up multiple windows of various types. So let's go ahead and create a new file. Let's create a new spreadsheet file. And here's the crazy thing. Very simple spreadsheet, right? But it has all the basic features that you'd expect. So I just entered little bit of data into the cell, and let's say equals the sum of those two cells, and then boom, it adds it together. It's really like a simplified version of, the spreadsheets from LibreOffice or Microsoft Office or what have you. But it is very, very functional. And you can save that out. If you want to go ahead and save it, you can save as, and of course it's going to take a minute to load up those file system translators again, which is probably the biggest annoyance, in spreadsheet format, which was the Apple Works spreadsheet format, or as ASCII text, which I believe is basically saving it out as a comma delimited file. I'll have to double check on that. I believe that's what it was doing. Now, the interesting thing is it also handles charts very well. So I can take data and create new charts off of that, pie charts, 3D looking pie charts, and save them out as graphics. And honestly, they don't actually look that terrible. It's I mean, they don't look great. They look dated, but it doesn't look as terrible as you'd expect it to look for being 30 years old, for being a time when I was running MS-DOS 4 and really no graphical applications to speak of other than the odd game here and there. It was all just text and ANSI and ASCII art. This was pretty amazing for the late 1980s. This was very cool. So it's very functional here. Honestly, that gives me a fully functional word processor that I can use for the majority of my work. But then I kept looking. What about drawing applications? Well, it turns out there's this thing called Beagle Draw, and it is exactly what you think. It's a drawing application, and it works just absolutely fine. It is a totally a layered, nice drawing application with shapes and freeform and text and all sorts of things that you can then save out as basically the Beagle Draw or as a pict. And .pict files are not exactly the most convenient, but I can still load them up on my Linux machine and then do something with them from there. Now you'll notice I keep talking about what I do with these files once so like, can I open them in LibreOffice and whatnot? And now clearly, if I'm going to live inside of an environment like this, if for any length of time, if I'm going to do any real work inside of it, I'm going to need to be able to move data back and forth. Now, this is the one rare instance where if I was running a Macintosh, this would be cake. So this machine is capable of AppleTalk, the old style AppleTalk, right? So I can share files from the Apple IIgs, from GSOS, directly with a Macintosh that's capable of the old type of AppleTalk, the old AppleTalk protocol. So if I had an old Mac, an old classic Mac especially, this would be cake. So if I loaded up a classic Mac emulator, I could absolutely share files between the two. Or either that, or I need to figure out a way to open for read and write those hard drive images that I'm using here within the system. Because currently I don't have that figured out yet. So it's a big stumbling block for me. So I need to get that figured out. I also really want to get the networking figured out in general. If I can get networking working on this machine, which the emulator supports it, and there is a TCP stack for GSOS that many people have used, including a web browser, Kontiki, which is just a very old school, lightweight style web browser. If I can get all that up and running on here over the next couple of days, I'll actually be able to move files around fairly simply. Especially if I can get like an FTP client or something like that going. That would just be absolutely choice. So then I can move files around. So that should work for that. Now, going further, we have also this cool application I found called Deluxe Paint. And Deluxe Paint is very straightforward. It is a painting application. Let's give it a moment. Deluxe Paint, last time I loaded it did take a while. You gonna rock and roll with that? Gonna do that for me? Nope. Deluxe Paint's just gonna crash. Luckily, it crashed with a beautiful white screen, so let's just go ahead and close that and bring that on back up. As you can see, computers in the 1980s did crash sometimes. Who knew? All right, so let's go ahead and close that down. We don't need to look at Deluxe Paint right now. Apparently, that's totally fine. One thing I did find, and I don't necessarily have a use for this right now, but it's very cool. There is apparently a version of HyperCard for the Apple IIgs. And I'm going to bring it up here just to show you what it looks like here. But it is a full HyperCard. It's HyperCard. This is HyperCard. And that is, let's call this test. See, this loads up. It's thinking about it. Now, here's what's cool. As I'm running this, as it's thinking, oh yeah, actually that's already loaded. There we go. Let's just quit because I don't actually know everything I'm doing here. As this is running here, I'm going to show you something really neat. Within this emulator, I can cycle through the various speeds, right? So the default speed of the system is a 2.8 megahertz system, which is seriously hobbled. And at 2.8 megahertz, you'll notice as I go through the menus, the redraw speed's a little slow. And like, let's say I double click on the games drive here. Takes a moment to read it and write it, right? Now let's cycle this over to 8 megahertz. There were expansion cards that were called zip expansion cards that allowed it to go up to 8 megahertz. Now let's go ahead and pop that open again, emulating 8 megahertz. Boom, so much faster. And we can actually check that out if we load the control panels from the Apple here. Down at the bottom of the control panels, I've got a little zip control panel here. We can pop this open, and it'll show us the emulator speed we're emulating. All right, so it's at 7.3 megahertz, so pretty close. If I can make it go even faster still, and crank that up to 24 megahertz, and you know what? You get a crazy fast machine. I mean, the old 2GS was never built to run at 24 megahertz, but at 8 megahertz, it seems about right. All right. Before we go any further, before I do anything additionally crazy and super nutty, let's talk about Pogo Linux just momentarily. The good folks over at Pogo Linux have so many pieces of Linux-powered hardware in their arsenal. If you just simply want to browse through their workstations, and these are workstations, these are not machines you go pick up at Best Buy. These are hardcore cases for hardcore people doing hardcore things that are capable of some pretty awesome feats. I mean, look at these cases. These are not your mammies and your pappies cases here. I mean, we're talking, Xeon processors, double wide cases that are just radical with a capable of storing a terabyte of RAM. I mean, it's just hardcore. They do servers, they do storage servers, but look at some of these cases for their desktops, just truly awesome. And of course, the folks over at Pogo Linux really do specialize in a lot of ways in software-defined storage. So if you're looking for like high levels of storage, being able to store just huge unending amounts of storage, like look at these, like 36, 60, 72 bay systems where they can have 70 plus or 60 plus drive bays in them. System 70 or Pogo Linux, sorry about that. Pogo Linux are your guys. They do awesome stuff. So you can go over to pogolinux.com to check them out. And wow, I gotta say, I want to give a big thanks to both of the sponsors of the show, System 76 and Pogo Linux. Both of you companies ship hardware out of the gate with Linux, and you provide excellent support, and that's why I've got you guys on here, and it's absolutely awesome. So for people who are looking around for good companies to support, who support Linux, who support free software, I can't recommend these two companies enough. Truly fantastic. All right, back to the Apple IIgs. All right, now I can get a little bit of work done. Clearly, I've got some investigation to do before I can get out there into the real world and move files back and forth between my emulated Apple IIgs drives and my main computers. But since these individual drives are only 32 megs in size, with all of them together, it's a really small amount of storage. We're talking about 100 meg-ish for the whole system, and that's including a lot of software. I'm going to show you some of the games in a minute. And what's really cool about that is I can copy those around using Nextcloud, OwnCloud, Dropbox, whatever your online cloud storage thing is, and really quickly sync it between my machines. I mean, really quickly, because these are not big files. And I can load this up on Android, I can load this up on Linux, I can load this up on really any system, because Kegs and GS Port run pretty much everywhere, which means I can have the exact same experience, same games, same applications, same data files right here on my production machine, on my Chromebook, on that System 76 Gallico Pro, on my phone, on my tablet, on everything I can have all of this. And that's really, really convenient and handy to be able to have your complete working environment be 100% portable everywhere you go. I can't stress how handy that is. That's super, super cool. Same exact applications. You don't have to worry about version discrepancies. You don't have to worry about anything. Very, very neat. All right. Games. So eventually you have to play games, right? I mean, I'm not going to just sit around and work all the time. So I grabbed a couple of games for the Apple IIgs that I thought were pretty cool. So to start with, let's see what the Apple IIgs is capable of. Well, let's load up Wolfenstein. Let's see if I can double click this here. There we go. Double clicking seems to be a little bit finicky. So let's load up Wolfenstein 3D. Yeah. This literally is full Wolfenstein 3D. We'll just, the original here. Oh, yeah. Now, I have it set to be a little bit too fast, so I'm going to have to use the keyboard to control it, but that's okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you didn't know you'd be having violence in this episode. So, realistically, I mean, this is a fairly capable old machine. I mean, look at this. This ain't bad. This really ain't bad. I mean, seriously, this is not too darn shabby. This runs definitely Wolfenstein better than my old 286 did. All right, so let's hop out of this real quick here, and I'm gonna go, boom. I'm gonna pop out of Wolfenstein. So obviously it's capable of actually some pretty intense stuff. Remember, that's a 1986 hardware here. Also, one of my favorite games of all time, Space Quest. You can't beat Space Quest. So let's go ahead and pop this open. Let's turn that down a little bit. What's my first name? Well, let's just pretend like I'm a 12-year-old boy. My first name is Poop. Right. Right. This is full old Space Quest. Just like it should be. I mean, it's super cool. Let's see, what year did this come out with? When did this come out? I don't even remember. This was so long ago. I loved this game. Yeah, let's go ahead and quit this. But just truly fantastic. And there's just so many great games here. Let's bring up, Leisure Suit Larry. We got Larry. We got Leisure Suit Larry here. There's so many games. A lot of old adventure games. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. How old am I? Leisure Suit Larry wants to know how old am I. I am 21 years old. To verify you are 21, please answer 5 simple questions. Okay. Leisure Suit Larry is an adult game, so it likes to ask you questions. So which is not a mountain range? Cayman, Appalachian, Rockies, Himalayas. Let's go Cayman. Cayman, did I get that right? Correct. Whew, that was close. The world is flat, spherical, a big place, near Fresno. Well, technically, it is. Let's go spherical. Let's go with that. Correct. The tackiest 70s fashion was platform shoes, midi skirts, short hair, bisexual. Let's go with platform shoes. Correct. Okay. Tom Hayden is one of the Chicago 7, a U.S. congressman, Mr. Jane Fonda, all of the above. Let's go with D. Correct. So far, so good. Now for the final question. Man, the age verification for this game is so dated. It's asking dated questions. And there's going to come a point where people aren't even going to be able to play this game because they'll have to look up all this information on Wikipedia or something. Which song was not recorded by Elvis? Hound Dog, Love Me Tender, What Did I Say, Heartbreak. Let's go, What Did I Say? I think that's right. Thank you. And now slip into your leisure suit. Your leisure suit, Larry. Oh, yeah. Open door. Okay. Oh, yeah, this is the leisure suit, Larry, that I remember. Let's look around. This is the sleaziest bar you've ever been in. All right, let's just go ahead and hop out of this. You can watch someone else play Leisure Suit Larry online. But it's amazing that this is all so terribly playable this way. There's a lot of games to have fun with here, and the graphics are really quite good. You know, you've got Lemmings, Paperboy, Space Ace, Space Quest, Tetris, Arkanoid, Beyond Zork. Oh, Defender of the Crown. You've got a full version of Defender of the Crown, my friends. Oh, that is just... See, can I skip past all this stuff? I don't think I can skip past it. I'm gonna kill it and come back, because I don't want to make you sit through a minute of intro animations. But there's just some really, really amazing games for this. So what I really have here is a fully functional system. I mean, it really is a fully functional system. It has most of everything I need day in, day out. It's missing communications utilities, which, you know, even if I have DOS going on, I have email clients and IRC clients and FTP clients and the like for DOS. But I don't really have that here at the moment. And it somewhat makes sense, and it also, you know, is something that should be possible, but I'm going to need to do some digging with it. It does have Kontiki as a web browser and a TCP stack that I can theoretically get up and running here, but I haven't done that yet. So where am I at with this? Is this going to be doable? Can I make this work? I think I can, and I would love anyone out there who has experience with Apple IIgs's. If you would like to see me try anything, if there's any pieces of software or mechanisms you recommend for round-tripping files in and out of these hard drive images I have, or in and out of the system via networking, or and getting the networking up and running all by itself, definitely let me know. I know this is weird. I know this is weird. I get it. This is not something that is for everybody. There's no doubt about that. And double clicking can be a real pain on occasion, but this is so much fun. I really enjoy doing this sort of thing. If you like this, definitely let me know. In about 2 weeks' time, we'll do the kind of the final version of this. I'll talk about how it went. I'll show you how I got networking working, if I did. I'll talk about how I got the hard drive opening and writing from a Linux system working, if I did, and how that experience was overall. But honestly, if I can get those things sorted, this is actually a pretty usable system. I don't know if it would become my daily driver. In fact, I'm positive it would not become my daily driver. But having it around, having a system that I can move around so quickly between every tablet and phone and computer I own is kind of actually handy. Plus, how cool would it be to be at a coffee shop? You pull open your laptop, like you like to pull open the System 76 massively space age Galago Pro laptop, pull it open, and then boom, full screen Apple IIgs emulator, just to get people's attention, just to see a little bit walking by. They catch a little sideways glance to see what you're working on your laptop, and then boom, this amazing looking, extremely high-end laptop, and they see an old Apple IIgs screen. I just think that's just a ton of fun. I don't know why it's fun. I'm weird. It's fine. We'll all survive till the end of time with it. And I'm going to have this with me all this weekend at Linux Fest Northwest. And again, I don't 100% know why. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I am. Now, if you don't care for this, if you don't want to hear anything more about an Apple IIgs, never fear. Tomorrow, the head honcho and one of the other dudes who's a good buddy of mine from Nextcloud is going to be on the show. We'll be talking about what they're doing, their current release of Nextcloud and all that good stuff. And then Thursday of this week, of course, is Linux Day. And Linux Day this week is all about games. We're going to be talking about games, non-stop games, Linux games. So if you have questions about Linux games, get them to me over on Twitter or Mastodon. I'm just at Brian Lunduke over on Twitter. Find me on Mastodon just by searching for Lunduke. You'll come across me pretty quickly. Those are the places I tend to check the most actively. What I do before Thursday's Linux Hour, usually the night before, I'll post a post and say, hey, does anyone have any questions? Reply to those posts, and that's how we make sure we see it during the show, and we kind of go through it and talk about it. And this week should be a lot of fun. I've got 2 people lined up tentatively to come on. Matt Hartley will be back. He's feeling a little bit better this week, which is excellent. And also Gardner, the Linux gamer who runs the Linux Gamer channel. I'm hoping we'll be right here. So the 3 of us together talking about Linux games, taking your questions on Linux games, and we have a couple of topics we want to talk about ourselves as well. So now, The shows that are happening this weekend at Linux Fest Northwest, I'm recording all of them. There's going to be 4 of them. I'm recording them all, and they start at 9:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. I've got a room to myself. We've got this like lecture hall. So we're setting up in a lecture hall, and I'm going to start recording at 9:30 a.m., and I'm going to keep on recording one show after another back to back until the mid-afternoon. We've basically got Lunduke Hall set up, right? It's going to be epic. And then those videos are all going to be released in order starting Monday. So all next week, the Lunduke Hour will all be live episodes or live recorded episodes from Linux Fest. So if you can't get to Linux Fest, you'll just have to wait a couple of days before the videos come out. Not too big of a deal. Being there in person is always a ton more fun. If you do plan to be there, if you are in the greater Pacific Northwest region of North America, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, that sort of thing, and you can get there and want to get there a little early. We've had issues in the past where we've hit capacity and we've had to actually kick people out because otherwise the fire marshal's going to get mad at us. And so I'd hate for that to happen to you. So get there a little bit early. My first show starts at 9:30 a.m. So get there, shoot for more like around 9 a.m. if you want to make sure you get a seat for that, just because I'd hate for you to miss out. All right, that's it. That's all. Nothing more going on at all. Thanks for letting me play with this stuff today, guys. I truly appreciate it. This is my happy place. I've talked in the past about having a spin-off show called Brian Lunduke's Happy Place, where I just play with old technology, and I've just decided the heck with it. I'm incorporating it into Lunduke Hour, assuming that people don't complain too much. And just every now and then, I like the opportunity to just play with this really old hardware, to look at it, to kick the tires and see what it was like living in the 80s again. And it's a ton of fun for me. So thanks, everybody. And I will see you all tomorrow.